Volkswagen is calling its new electric model ID.3 the most important model of the decade. After icons such as the Beetle or Golf manufactured in the millions, VW hopes the ID.3 is a breakthrough in the era of electromobility. The ID.3 is a hatchback very similar to the legendary Golf in terms of its practical use. But because the ID.3 is built on a completely new MEB platform for EVs, there are some significant differences. The utterly crucial difference is the repositioning of the entire drive to the rear axle. This means that this new age Golf is a rear-wheel drive car. The reason is simple. The electric motor is able to generate high torque from virtually 0 RPMs. Front-wheel drive electric cars often have a big problem with transferring engine power to the road. An example is the Hyundai Kona, which has considerable problems mainly accelerating on wet roads. That totally piqued my curiosity to see how the rear-wheel drive would help this problem. Really, the result is near perfection. In contrast to the careful dosing of power when starting off with the Kona, I can press the accelerator pedal to the floor on dry and wet roads alike with the ID.3, and the hatchback sits beautifully, loading the rear wheels while accelerating wonderfully without slipping. The ID.3 acts during direct acceleration on wet roads almost like an all-wheel drive car. Of course, in corners it is easy to reach the rear drive limit. When it does, it immediately engages the traction control, but even then, it is still very good. By the way, in dry conditions and wet, of which I had plenty during the tests, I was impressed with the tyres. Continental Eco Contact 6, which do not perform at all like hard eco tyres geared only towards distance driving. Their grip let the car hold corners even in wet conditions. They also handle maximum braking like a star. The low-slung, roughly 500kg battery helps provide a low centre of gravity, so tilting into corners is kept to a minimum. However, we have to consider the total higher weight of the car. Despite its powerful drive, the ID.3 is no hot hatch. It'd have to lose a lot of weight. In terms of faster driving, you have to get used to the strange, extra soft brake pedal with longer travel. This is due to deceleration first by regenerative braking, and only then do the classic brakes kick in. But that odd feeling when braking soon faded, and by the end of the test week, I had no real issues with it. The regenerative braking can handle up to 90% of normal braking, as evidenced by the clean front rims free of any signs of dust from the brake pads. Since most of the deceleration is done by regenerative braking, the rear axle cleverly uses drum brakes, which do not rust with minimal use, a common occurrence for electric cars with rear disc brakes. What I really didn't like, however, was the settings of the ID.3 suspension. Even though the car was fitted with the smallest possible wheel size at 18 inches, the settings can be described as somewhat sporty. But despite very high tyre sidewalls, ID.3 cannot solidly filter out ordinary minor irregularities in the roadway. What I expect from the MEB platform, however, was a decent turning circle. Today, when many cars have a rather disappointing steering angle, the designers logically used the empty front, which contains only the electric part of the drive, for the possibility of turning the wheels significantly more than normal. The result is a spectacular turning circle. We compared the turning circle with an older Golf, and here you can see the result. The tested vehicle was from the first edition series, which includes, among other things, a 62kW battery, with slightly less power actually available, however, namely 58kW. The remaining 4kW form the so-called buffer, which protects the battery from excessive discharge, and vice versa. The synchronous electric motor with permanent magnets produced by VW itself delivers torque of 310 Nm and 150 kW of power. By the way, the weaker version of the ID.3 with a power of 107 kilowatts, and oddly enough the same torque, 310 Newton meters as the stronger version, has exactly the same engine. Only it is provided with less juice by electronics. Given the same torque, even the weaker version might not be bad at all. What does 150 kilowatts and 310 Newton meters mean in the case of a relatively heavy hatchback? According to the well-known YouTuber Bjorn Neelan, the ID.3 weighs exactly 1,840 kilograms with a 62 kilowatt-hour battery, which is really a lot for a hatchback Golf class, due in large part to the heavy battery. The new Golf 8 weighs around 400 kilograms less in a similarly powerful version. But the reality is much better than you'd expect. The accelerations from rest are completely smooth, but very fast. Every overtaking of vehicles is done in seconds, making it safer. The sovereignty of the ID.3 drive is so good that it makes the car a lot of fun to drive, even without the sound of an internal combustion engine. I dare say that up to a motorway speed of 130 km an hour, the ID.3 is one of the zippiest cars on the road. Whenever you step on the throttle, there is an immediate, and for the rest of the crew, unexpected acceleration, all the while with the barely noticeable, seemingly distant whistling of the electric drive. In this, the ID.3 is even much better than, say, the Audi e-tron, which whistles audibly into the interior during acceleration and regen. These are sounds very similar to a tram or subway train. The worst thing is to get back into the combustion engine car after a week of electric driving. And as much as I like both, I have to admit, the first impression is always the lasting one. Somehow, the latter doesn't want to go. It vibrates, it hums. I can't always shake the impression that I'm sitting in a 19th century steam engine. And I can't say my turbocharged gasoline-powered car is outdated. But what about the ID.3's consumption? I drove a lot around the city and surroundings, and the short stops combined with the cold autumn weather making it necessary to repeatedly heat the interior had a rather negative impact on consumption. Consumption always exceeded 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which is quite a lot. The more expensive version of the ID.3 have a heat pump for more economical interior heating, reducing consumption when you have to keep the car warm. Motorway driving revealed a consumption of 18 kilowatt hours, and that's not too shabby. On those rides, we weren't trying to drive economically, we drove as fast as the flow of traffic. The result is a bit paradoxical, because electric cars tend to have a very low consumption in the city and higher on the highway. Just as it seems, frequent heating of the interior is quite energy intensive. The test ID.3 handled charging with power of up to 100 kilowatts, meaning that on the motorway it is possible to recharge the battery for another 100 kilometers of driving in just 11 minutes. I tried recharging an almost completely drained battery with only 3% on a powerful 150 kilowatt charger. However, the ID.3 can only charge a maximum of 100 kilowatts. Charging above 80% is always very slow, so it's not advisable to recharge to higher values if not necessary. Unfortunately, these times apply to charging stations with a power output of 100 kilowatts or more. At the widely prevalent 50 kilowatt stations, everything will take about twice as long. And what about the quality of the body and roominess of the ID.3? According to VW, roominess should be almost at the Passat level, thanks to the long wheelbase. Unfortunately, that didn't quite work out. I don't know where the 14cm longer wheelbase than the Golf gets swallowed up, but when I sit behind my seat, I have just enough legroom. In this, it's very similar to the Golf 8. At least the ID.3 has a straight floor in the back. What isn't so pleasing is the poor rear view to the corners, where a thick rear pillar is in the way. Contrarily, the view forward and sideways is very good. And here's the latest information on the bodywork. Apparently, thanks to the very solid battery built into the chassis, the ID.3 is incredibly rigid. It does not twist at all and nothing creaked in the interior throughout testing. You may now think the ID.3 is almost perfect. Unfortunately, like almost every car, the ID.3 has its weak points. There are two main ones: interior cutbacks and software. First of all, there's a lot of visible scrimping and saving on some parts of the interior. The first problem I see in the cheap, hard plastics used on the doors and part of the dashboard, which show various spots after a few weeks of use that are moreover difficult to clean. Completely incomprehensible are the piano black door handles. At this, the most used place on the door, dozens of scratches from fingernails or rings will crop up after 1 year. It's been years since I've seen a car whose front bucket seats didn't have pockets on the backside. This related to our lower trim level cars. Another example of misplaced savings is that there are only 2 controllers for operating the front and rear windows at the driver. The last little point of irritation is when you recharge. To start recharging, you need to pull the plastic cap out of the DC jack and hang it up on the hose below. Overall, I feel that VW seems to have saved cheaply at all costs. At the same time, the total reductions can add up to how much? 50 or 100 euro? I don't think it's dignified for a car that's supposed to be a future Volkswagen icon. As VW has admitted, ID.3 is unfortunately coming to market with incomplete software. Literally. For example, the information system cannot yet find charging stations and create a roadmap including charging, which can be a fatal problem for less experienced new electric car owners. Furthermore, the implementation of Apple CarPlay and Android Auto is missing. These deficiencies should be remedied by next year by the final software upgrade. So is the ID.3 really the best hatchback VW has ever made? Yes and no. ID.3 is really better than any Golf in several respects, but it's worse in a few areas. Here I present the main pros and cons of the ID.3 that resulted from the test. Excellent handling characteristics, great acceleration from rest and in-gear acceleration, excellent steering angle, handling, very good brakes, high safety rating, 5 stars from Euro NCAP, solid range but lower than declared, charging speed, soundproofing of the interior, very rigid body. Cons: high price, higher weight, cheap-looking interior in light of the price, unfinished software, poor rear view to corners, no frunk, boot under the front bonnet, higher consumption in cold weather. So there we have it, the new ID.3 from Volkswagen. A great little electric car with a few minor niggles. Thanks for watching, as ever like and subscribe, and see you next time.